Everybody, welcome to the Jayda InStitches show, and happy May! For this month's 2020 calendar blanket patchwork square, we're going to explore the log cabin pattern. Log cabin patchwork is one of my favorite patterns regardless of whether I'm knitting, crocheting, or quilting. I love how it's a neat visual representation of a fractional math problem. Now, we're not going to make you do any math, but once you see the pattern emerging, you can see how you can just keep adding blocks forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. So technically, you could really make this square as big as you wanted to. And another nifty thing about this square, every odd numbered block squares it up. Every even numbered block creates a rectangle. And once you've got that pattern sort of in your head, well, you can see how it starts to spiral from the center out. You get the middle square, add another little square, you have a rectangle. Add the third square, you get a square. See that little square there with those 3 blocks? Add an even square, you get a rectangle. Add an odd block, you get a square again. It's just so neat. I love the way it works. And normally when I demonstrate these patchwork squares, I use 2 colors. And in the beginning we said you can use just 2 colors for your basic square, and you can add any other color you want as your border. And there's still a way to use only 2 colors to make the log cabin. Mr. InStitches will put a graph in here somewhere. And it's really neat. It totally changes the look of it, but you can still do it. One pattern, so many options. I thought though, for the purpose of showing the pattern as we work through it, I would use 5 individual colors. So I went with 4 shades of pink and my usual blue. And I really like how that turned out. Kind of a neat monochromatic thing. But I made another one. This one has nice, bright, bold, contrasting colors, so you can really see those blocks. And I love how this one worked out too. So neat. Anyway, you can use this block because it's square, and the way we put it together, you've always got stitches going in one direction or another. You can use it any way you want when you put together your blanket at the end of the year. And all of the squares or blocks are built onto the ones that are already there. So there's no complicated joining. You're just crocheting as you go on top of the existing squares, but we'll show you how that works when we get into it. So let's grab our hooks, grab our yarn, we'll head on over to the craft table, and we will stitch up the May log cabin square together. In order to make our log cabin patchwork square, you want to make sure you're using the same kind of yarn you were using for your previous patchwork squares. So for me, that's a size 4 medium weight acrylic yarn. You want a pair of scissors, a yarn needle, and use the same size hook as your other squares. I've been using a 5.5 millimeter, also known as an I or a 9 in the US, a size 5 in the UK. Today's patchwork square consists of 5 different blocks. So regardless of what colors you want for your blocks, they break down into relatively small amounts. So blocks 1 and 2, you need 10 yards per block. For your blocks 3 and 4, you need around 20 yards per block, and for block number 5 you need around 30 yards. Those are approximate numbers. It's always good to have a little extra yarn on hand because we all crochet with different tension. You also want about 10 yards of your border color. I'll be using white. It's the same color I've been using for all of my borders thus far. And once you've got all that together, we can get started. If you really enjoy our show and you have a lot of fun with us here, then consider supporting us. You can subscribe, click the like button, share our videos with your friends, or you can purchase a pattern at our Etsy shop or join and become a channel member. You'll find more information in the description box down below, links to our Etsy shop, and also how to join, and there's more information if you click that join button below this browser. It really helps to make yourself a diagram when making one of these patchwork blocks. In order to make today's log cabin style, you want to draw yourself a square. Draw about 1/3 of the way down, 1 bar all the way across, and then about 1/3 of the way in, a bar all the way down, and then a third of the way up, a bar all the way across, and then split the last little piece in half. And that gives you 2 squares, 2 medium-sized rectangles, and 1 long rectangle across the top. Then take a moment to color it in any way you like. That will help keep you on track as we work on our patchwork square. Today I'm going to be using 4 different shades of pink. I had to bust out the crayons for this one. And a blue in the center. So I'm going to start with blue, and I'm going to gradually move from the darkest shade of pink all the way up to the lightest. And the log cabin square is kind of built in a spiral, and I'll explain more about that when we get to it. But we're all going to start with block number 1, which is the very center of our square. So grab that color right now. We're going to begin with a slip knot. And we're going to chain 14 to begin. Once you've chained 14, we're going to skip the first 3 chains from the hook, find the 4th, and double crochet into it. You're going to double crochet in each chain all the way back. These turning chains are going to count as a double crochet stitch, so including those, you will have 12 stitches at the end of row 1. At the end of row 1, you'll have 12 stitches. That includes your little turning chains here. They act as a double crochet stitch. You're going to chain 2, turn your work. You're going to chain 2 and turn at the end of every row in this square. Always skip the first stitch because that chain 2 counts as a double crochet. So that stitch is accounted for. Skip to the next one and double crochet into it. Double crochet in each stitch across, and make sure you double crochet into the top of the turning chains because that is a double crochet, or at least it counts as one. I'll show you what that looks like though when we get there. When you get across to the end, there's your turning chains. Remember, that counts as a double crochet stitch, so you find the top of them. So that very top chain, stick your hook through it, and work your last double crochet of the row. So that's 11 real double crochets and the chain 2 turning chains that counts as a double crochet stitch. You include that. So that's 12 stitches in total per row. Chain 2 and turn at the end of every row. Always skip that first stitch, double crochet into the next stitch, double crochet into each stitch across, including the turning chain, or the top of the turning chain. You'll have 12 stitches in each row. You want to do this for 6 rows in total. Once you've finished 6 rows, and each row has 12 stitches in total, including your chain 2, you can snip your yarn, fasten off, and you can take a moment to weave in your short tails, especially if you feel that that helps keep things neat and tidy as you go, or you can just work over top of them. That's what I'm going to do. But we're all going to take our square and we're going to turn it clockwise because patch number 2 is going to be worked across the left side of patch number 1. At this point, you want to grab your graph. We started with patch number 1. We've turned it clockwise and we're going to begin patch number 2. So for me, that is the darkest pink color I have. We're all going to begin with a slip knot. And we're going to join our yarn in the edge of what was row 6 of patch number 1. So the first edge is a double crochet stitch. I'm going to slip my hook underneath the first 2 loops of that stitch, and I want to work over on top of my short tail, so I'm going to pull everything to the inside of my work and join my yarn with a slip stitch. Tug the tails towards the inside of your work. That will help keep things nice and neat and tidy along the edge. And chain 2. Chain 2 counts as a double crochet, so that's the first stitch completed. We're going to work 2 double crochets into the edge of each of those 6 rows that made up patch number 1. So that means we only have to work 1 more double crochet into this stitch. So I'm going to work double crochet. There's the stitch. I'm going to just bisect it. And I'm still working over my little short tails. Like I said, you can leave them out and weave them in later if you find that's easier. The next row we come to was a chain 2 that runs across the side of it, so you can work a double crochet into each of those chains. And the next row we come to, that was a double crochet, so you want to work a double crochet into each of those sets of loops, or wherever you feel you can comfortably, evenly work a couple of double crochets, and that's all you're doing. Just working 2 double crochets per edge of row all the way down. There's 6 rows, so that means we'll have 12 double crochets at the end of the first row of patch number 2. Once you get to the last row, you can do one of 2 things. You can work a double crochet into the first of those 2 chains, or you can work it into one in the middle and then one into the top of the turning chains. It doesn't really matter because everything will get evened out as we go along. I'm just going to work into each of the next 2 chains. I'm going to leave the top of that free because technically that is the 12th stitch across the bottom of patch number 1, and you will be using this a little later on. So if you don't want to use it right now, you don't have to. If you do want to use it, it's okay. You're just going to use it twice. So again, it's patchwork, there's no real rules. What you do want to have are 12 stitches all the way across the left side of patch number 1. And from here on out, it's the same as patch number 1. You're just going to chain 2. The chain 2 counts as a double crochet. Always skip that first stitch, double crochet into the next stitch, double crochet into each stitch all the way across. Don't forget to double crochet into the top of the turning chains when you get to them, all the way over here. You're going to have 12 stitches in each row, chain 2, turn at the end of every row, and you're going to do the same thing, 6 rows, 12 stitches each. Patch number 2, built across the left side of patch number 1, is 6 rows in total. Each row has 12 stitches in it, and that includes the chain 2 turning. You can snip your yarn, fasten off. You can weave in your tails or work over top of them, just like I'm going to continue to. But you're going to take your piece now and turn it clockwise so that we can work patch number 3 across the left side of patch 2 and across what is the top of patch number 1. So 12 stitches and 12 stitches for a total of 24. You can grab your little graph. There's patch 1, patch 2, so patch 1 you turn, patch 2 you turn. We are now working patch 3, so you want to grab that color now. We're all going to begin with a slip knot, and this is all going to start to look very familiar from here on out. So the first 12 stitches we're going to do are worked across the side of patch number 2. So just like we did with patch number 2 to start, you're going to slip your hook underneath the edge of what was row 6 for patch number 2. I'm going to work over all of my short tails, so I'm going to pull them all to the inside. There we go. Join with a slip stitch. Tug my tails to the inside of my work. That helps keep things tidy on the outside. I'm going to chain 2. That counts as a double crochet. I've got one more double crochet to work into the edge of what was row 6 on patch number 2. That's the first row done. There are 5 more row edges across the side of patch number 2. I want to work 2 double crochet, 2 double crochet, 2, 2, and 2. So you'll have 12 double crochet at the end of this first little part of patch number 3. That's 12 double crochet, including the chain 2 that began it, worked across the left side of patch number 2. That brings me up to the top of what is patch number 1. So I just need to work another 12 stitches across here. You're trying to evenly space them as much as possible. And if you're not really sure where to work that first stitch, it's pretty clear because you're looking at the top of that block. But if you were unsure and going forward, this is a good little technique to use if you're ever unsure of where to put your first stitch. Find the turning chain or where you know the last stitch will be worked when you get across to the end. So there's the top of the turning chain. I know number 12 has to be worked there. So I can count 12 from here. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So I know my first stitch has to be worked there, and that will allow me to put 12 stitches in nice and even all the way across the top of what was patch number 1. So 12 and 12, you'll have 24 stitches at the end of row 1 for patch number 3. So that's row number 1 of patch number 3. We joined and chained 2. You've worked 12 evenly spaced stitches, including that chain 2, across the side of patch 2. Another 12 across the top of patch 1. I've worked 12, the number 24 I should say, into the top of the turning chain there. So it's nice and even so far. And the rest of block number 3 is just like the other 2 blocks. Chain 2, turn at the end of every row. Always skip that first stitch. Double crochet in each stitch all the way to the end. You'll now have 24 stitches in each row, but you still want to do 6 rows in total. Don't forget that the last stitch, or the 24th stitch of the row, is worked into the top of the turning chain. That's all you need to know. I'll see you at the end of row 6. That's patch number 3 finished. There are 6 rows in patch number 3, just like the previous 2 patches, but because it's double the length of these 2 squares put together, you have 24 stitches in each row. That includes your turning chain. You can snip your yarn, fasten off, weave in your tails if you want. You are, however, going to turn your work, and then you're going to pivot it clockwise so that you work patch number 4 across the sides of both patch 3 and patch 1. We want to keep patch number 1 in the center. So we're here, we did this one, and now we want to do this one up here. So make sure patch number 1 is sitting in your top left and your third patch is over on the right so that you can work patch number 4 across the sides of those 2 patches. Grab the color for patch number 4 or block number 4. We're going to begin with a slip knot. And because we're working across the sides of 2 blocks now, so like block number 3, block number 4 is going to have 24 stitches in it. You're going to work 2 double crochet into the edge of each of those 6 rows from block number 3 and into the edge of each of those 6 rows from block number 1. So you're working across the sides of stitches for this entire first row. You can take your yarn, find the top of the turning chain that was the edge of row or block number 3, join with a slip stitch in the top of those turning chains. So that's the end of row 6 for block number 3. Join your yarn with a slip stitch in the turning chains. Chain 2, just like all the other blocks. Work a double crochet into the edge of that row to finish it off. So it's 2 double crochet per row edge. And then, just like we've done before, identify the next row edge. There it is. Evenly space a couple of double crochets across the edge of that row. There's another one. Try to grab a couple of loops. You don't want to make any gappy gaps. And you want to try and evenly space them. So double crochet into the edge of the next row. There we go. And keep going. So you know you're going to have 2 stitches per row edge. There are 6 rows per square, so that's 24 stitches at the end of the first row of block number 4. I'll catch up with you when we get there. That's 24 stitches, including the chain 2 that began, worked across the sides of those 2 blocks. Now I want to point something out. I worked my last 2 double crochets into the edge of the last row, but I didn't use the foundation chain. I'm going to use that instead when I come along and work row or patch number 5, so I can clearly use the bottoms of those stitches. That's the bottom of patch number 1. So I'm not going to use that. If you wanted to use that because you felt that that was the even place to put your last stitch, go ahead. Just remember you're going to have to use it a second time when you work across the bottom of everything for patch number 5. So it's completely up to you if you use that right now or not. But you do want to have 24 stitches. And now it's just like the other patch. Chain 2, turn your work, skip that first stitch, double crochet into the next stitch, double crochet in each stitch across. Don't forget the top of the chain 2 from the previous row. You're going to have 24 stitches in each row, and you're going to have 6 rows in total because patch number 4 looks exactly like patch number 3. Here's patch number 4, 6 rows. Each row is 24 stitches across, and that includes the chain 2. You can snip your yarn, fasten off, weave in your tails if you like. You are, however, going to flip your work and then twist it counterclockwise, I should say, so that we are now working patch number 5 across the side, the bottom, and the side of patches 4, 1, and 2. So remember, you want to keep patch number 1, there's 2, 3, 4, and now we want to work patch number 5. That's the biggest patch we're doing right across those 3 blocks. So this patch is going to be 36 stitches across, 12, 12, and 12. So grab patch number 5's color now. We're all going to begin with a slip knot. We're going to join our yarn in the top of the turning chain that was at the end of row 6 of our last patch, patch number 4. Chain 2, that counts as a double crochet. Work 1 more double crochet into the edge of that row. And then you've got 5 more rows to go across the side of patch number 4. And we're going to do this one little patch at a time. That's 2 double crochet per row edge across the side of what was block number 4. Oh, that pink is just delicious. That's 12 stitches. Now we want to work 12 across the bottom of patch number 1. So I chose not to work into that foundation chain. You can see it's still marked with my little short tail, but I am going to use it now. And it's easy to see that would obviously be the first place I work the first double crochet, working across the bottom of patch number 1. And then I'm just going to work a double crochet into each of those foundation chains. They sit underneath the double crochets from the first row of patch number 1. So 12 all the way across, pretty easy to see. And I'll catch up with you at the end of that set of 12. There's 12 double crochets worked across the bottom of patch 1, so that's 24 so far. We've got 12 more to go. We're working across the side of patch number 2 now. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 row edges. You're going to work a double crochet or 2 double crochets per row edge. Try to evenly space them. Remember to try and grab a couple of loops. You don't want anything to look too gappy. There we go. So that's the first 4 made. There's 2 per row edge. You just want to work 2 per row edge, and I'll catch up with you at the end. We'll have 36 stitches at the end of row 1 for this last patch. That's my last 12. You count them up, you should have 36 double crochet, including that turning chain, all the way across. That's row 1 for your last patch, patch number 5. Chain 2, turn your work, and just like the other patches, we want 6 rows in total. Always skip that first stitch, double crochet into the next stitch, and in each one across, don't forget to double crochet into the top of the turning chain. 6 rows in total. Each row will have 36 stitches in it. And that is patch number 5 done. There are 6 rows. Each row has 36 stitches, including the chain 2. And that's it for the patchy part. Now you can snip your yarn, fasten off, weave in any tails, and we're going to add our border now. So weave in your tails and grab your border color. We're going to take our border color and we're going to make a slip knot. And we're going to begin by working across the top of the last patch we made. So we're going to join our yarn in the top of the chain 2. So the top of the chain 2. So that was the beginning of row 6 of our last patch. Chain 2 to begin. And you're just going to double crochet into each of those 35 stitches, so 36 including the top of the chain 2 here. Double crochet into each of those 35 stitches. You'll have 36 stitches, including your chain 2, when you get across to the edge of this first side of our border. Including the chain 2 that we began with, that's 36 stitches across the first side of our border. You're going to chain 2, this little chain 2 just turns the corner for us. And now we're going to work 36 stitches across the second side. So 24 of them will be worked across the top of this patch, number 4, right there. So those are pretty easy to see. The first 12 are going to be worked across the sides of these 6 rows of our last patch. So just do what we've done all along. Find the first stitch or the first row, work a couple of double crochets into the side of it. So just stick your hook through the side of the stitch. Try to grab at least a couple loops there. And then there's another one. So working a couple of loops. So that's the first 2 stitches worked across the edge of the first row. Here's the next row. Same thing. Work a couple of double crochets here. And that just leaves 4 more rows. That's the first 12 stitches across the second side of my border, so that's 2 double crochet per row along the side of my last big patch, and that just leaves 24 more stitches easily worked across the top of that 4th patch. But if you're not sure where to work your first stitch, so for example you get to this point and you're wondering, well, does it go there? Does it maybe go there? Remember, you want to count. So there's the last stitch. So that would be the first place, or that would be the last place I work a stitch, because it's sort of the end of the row. And I can count backwards, and I've already counted. This would be the 23rd stitch, which means I have to work my first double crochet right here because I used the top of the turning chain previously. So I'm working twice into the same place. So I recommend you count. You want to have 24 stitches worked across the top of that next part. So this 4th patch here. I've used that top of the turning chain. Here's where my next one goes. So remember, when you use a turning chain, sometimes the next stitch looks a little funny. Don't miss it. So that's the first 2 stitches worked across the top of that patch. So I'm up to 14 stitches now, 36 in total all the way across. And I'll catch up with you at the end of this side. Across the second side, you should have 36 double crochets in total. We're going to chain 2. This just turns our corner. Side 3, we're working across the side of our 4th patch or our 4th block and across the top of our 3rd block. So once again, there's going to be 12 double crochet worked evenly across the side of that block, or 2 double crochet per row edge. And then you're going to work 24 double crochet across the top of that patch. And if you're not sure where to put the first stitch once you get there, then count backwards from the edge, and wherever you get to 23, if that's 24, that's where you work that first stitch to start that section of the patch. You want 36 stitches in total, and you want to evenly work them as best you can. That's 36 stitches worked across the 3rd side, or 12 and 24. You're going to chain 2, turn the corner, and the last side for our border, you've got 3 patches to work across. So 12 double crochet across the side of that patch, or 2 double crochet per row edge, and there's 6 row edges. 12 double crochet worked across the top of patch number 2, and 12 double crochet worked across the side of patch number 5, and that's 2 double crochet per row edge. It'll be a total of 36 double crochet. Just take your time and I'll see you at the end. 36 stitches across the last side, so 12, 12, and 12, and however you evenly need to space them. If your last double crochet winds up in the same place as the one you started with, which is a chain 2, that's fine, as long as it looks even. Chain 2 just to turn the corner, find the top of the chain 2 that began the whole row, and join with a slip stitch. And that's it. You can snip your yarn, fasten off, grab your yarn needle. We're going to just weave in our tail now. I like to bring it down just through a little stitch edge. Let's see, I guess I'll go down through here. And then just turn it into the underside of those stitches. It's nice to weave a like color yarn in with like color stitches. That's way it doesn't look as obvious. You don't see it. Don't pull too tight. You don't want to pull your stitches out of alignment. Double back. So to jump over the last loop and double back. Do it 2 or 3 times or until you run out of yarn. If you have a whole lot of yarn, you can trim any excess. This just basically keeps it from unraveling. And there we go. And there you have it, the basic log cabin concept, insofar as patchwork is concerned. We hope you enjoyed making the May Square along with us this week, and we will see you soon here on the Jayda InStitches show. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, and have an awesome week, everybody. Bye!
Hi everybody, Mr. InStitches here. Thank you for watching today. Here are some of our other videos you might be interested in. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe.